Hi there, here's a short topic video looking at a particular aspect of environmental market failure. It's the idea of the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons is associated with the overuse of so-called common pool resources. So these are resources which are potentially have a maximum sustainable yield, but which are basically open access to agents. In that sense, they are a bit like a public good, they're non-excludable. Examples might include irrigation systems, common grazing land, open forests, and perhaps fish stocks in the oceans. Now, the idea behind the tragedy of the commons is that the pursuit of individual self-interest, the maximising behaviour of private sector agents, is not often good, in fact it's often very bad for social efficiency. Indeed, it can lead to the long-term diminution and decline of resources. Consider, for example, the basic idea of a stock of common grazing land that might be used by all farmers in a village. If each farmer keeps adding more of their livestock to graze on the commons, they can do this because the marginal cost of that is zero. But once each person adds more livestock to the meadow or to the grazing land, that can lead to a depletion of the soil, a fall in yields from the resource, and ultimately lower productivity, and that can feed through to a fall in the market value of the resource for all users. Indeed, it may be the case that the resource can become irretrievably damaged, permanently damaged, the maximum sustainable yield may fall. The key to this is to understand that the contribution of each agent is minute, but summed or aggregated all over all agents, these actions can cause long-term significant damage. And this is the idea of the tragedy of the commons. The key point really is that the tragedy of the commons is mainly due perhaps to the lack of property rights, so that an authority, a government, a community cannot necessarily protect the resource. Now, some people argue that the tragedy of the commons is a reason for privatisation of land, privatisation or private ownership of common pool resources. That's one interpretation of the issue. It's not necessarily the interpretation given by one of the greatest economists of the last century, who sadly passed away a few years ago, Professor Elinor Ostrom. Now, Elinor Ostrom is the only woman to have won the Nobel Prize in economics. She deservedly was given the Nobel Prize for her work in understanding better the community's role in managing common pool resources. She argued that privatisation was not necessarily the answer, drawing on some groundbreaking in-the-field research in meadows and pastures around the world, often in very isolated rural communities. She argued that people, communities, are capable of creating their own rules, their own institutions that actually allow for a sustainable and equitable, fair management of shared resources. I love this quote. There's no reason to believe that bureaucrats and politicians, no matter how well-meaning, are better at solving problems than the people on the spot, people on the ground, who have the strongest incentive to get the solution right, hinting at government failure as attempts to overcome the tragedy of the commons. So the tragedy of the commons is essentially environmental market failure. There could be a case for state intervention, effective incentives for people to manage and husband resources properly. But the work of Elinor Ostrom suggests that actually sometimes the solution and effective policy is to leave it in the hands of communities to devise rules and institutions which govern how these resources are managed. The tragedy of the commons is an important idea, I think a particularly important idea in the current sustainability debate. And please Google Elinor Ostrom if you want to find out about the work of a truly wonderful economist. Thank you.